Hi class, Chef Toi here. Today we'll be making our own version of a coffee flavoring. And why do we want to use coffee flavoring? When you think about it, right? If you have buttercream or chantilly cream or a mousse and you want to flavor it into like a coffee flavor profile, if you were to just brew coffee and then you added it into their chantilly cream or your buttercream, it's going to either deflate your chantilly cream or separate from your buttercream, right? And so that's partly because there's a lot of liquid into coffee, and in order to get that really nice, beautiful coffee flavor, you need a lot of coffee, right? And so how can you add coffee into this without ruining your final product? And that's when coffee concentrates, coffee emulsions, or coffee flavoring, or even coffee extracts all come to play. And so there's this very, very common coffee flavoring that is used in France. It's called Trablit, and it's spelled Trablit, and that's a very, very common coffee extract that they use in France to literally flavor anything, for their opera cakes, for even just a simple syrup. They make a simple syrup, and to make like a coffee simple syrup so that they can soak their sponge cake or their genoise, they basically add Trablit right into like their simple syrup. And so how can we make Trablit our version, right, without breaking the bank? Because I can tell you that little bottle costs almost $70 to $80. It's expensive. And even when you buy just coffee extracts, sometimes they're expensive. But what you don't realize is that you can make it at home for a very, very affordable price. You get big bang for your bucks, right, is what they say. And so I have a version that I want to show you guys today, and I'm excited. And so what you will need is 1 cup of granulated sugar and 1 cup of espresso. If you do not have an espresso machine to make fresh and nice, really beautiful, good quality espresso, that's totally okay. You can actually use espresso powder. And so I do want to clarify, espresso powder is an instant coffee. It's basically an instant espresso coffee. And what that basically means is that if you were to add this powder right into hot liquid, it will just dissolve. Okay, and so don't get it confused with ground espresso, because ground espresso is actually the ground coffee that you're actually supposed to put through a coffee machine that needs to be filtered out in order to get that coffee, okay? But you can do that version, or you can do this version where you can get the instant espresso powder. And what I did is I actually did 4 tablespoons of espresso powder to 1 cup of water, partly because I really want it to be deep in flavor. If you want it to be even more deep in flavor, add another tablespoon. But if you can't find instant espresso powder, you can use instant coffee. Do you know that instant coffee is a little bit lighter in coffee flavor profile, and instant espresso powder is a little bit deeper? And so this is always better to go. However, if you cannot find this, you can use instant coffee. And if you use instant coffee, this one I was saying I used 4 tablespoons to 1 cup. You would want to use 6 to 8 tablespoons in 1 cup for this, in 1 cup of hot water for just instant coffee, okay? And so you'll still get the same effect, but you do want that to all dissolve. Your mise en place is going to be 1 cup of, it's equal parts, right? So it's just 1 cup of sugar and then 1 cup of your coffee or your espresso. And after, what we're basically doing is creating a dry caramel. And a dry caramel is basically a caramel that you're caramelizing down to make into like a caramel, right? But what you're doing is actually just using straight granulated sugar. A wet caramel has either added corn syrup or water to sugar, and you cook that down to that nice, beautiful amber color to get caramel. However, a dry caramel, same process, but you're eliminating the liquid. And so it's not necessary to have to add any more liquid to this, because we're already adding the coffee into it as part of the liquid part of it, okay? And so very similar process as to how you make a caramel sauce, and you deglaze a caramel sauce, right, with heavy cream and butter added at the end. But instead, for a coffee flavoring, you're actually deglazing it with the coffee and the espresso itself. And so we're gonna go ahead and get that started, and I'm gonna show you the process, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions, you have my information. You can definitely message me, and if you have any questions on this process, okay? All right, so I have my heat on high, and what I'm doing is I'm actually using a skillet, a lower pan so you can actually see through it. But sometimes I don't mind using just like a you know, a little pot like this because it makes more sense. You know, once the sugar kind of boils up, there's like the space for it. However, I'm just doing it in this type of pan because I do want you to be able to see the sugar. And so it's just kind of also the angle of my camera as well. But I have the heat on high, and so I'm waiting for this to get kind of like more on like hot to warm, warm to hot type of temperature. But I can actually start adding it now if I want, but you don't want it to get too hot because once you add the sugar in, it's just going to immediately burn. So what you want to do is just kind of add in some sugar right here just to kind of base the bottom, and you'll actually start seeing that it's starting to melt, and that's the heat working to melt the sugar. And this is what we call a dry caramel. A dry caramel basically means that you're just doing straight sugar to get a caramel. You're not adding water anything into it to get to the caramel stage. And so you can actually see that it's starting to get color on the edges, and you just want to, as it melts, as the sugar melts, you just want to keep moving your pot or your pan. You want to just keep adding more sugar in. Okay? And so what the goal is to get like a kind of like a nice deep amber color. You're not trying to get a burnt caramel flavor. You don't want that burnt flavor, trust me. It's just going to taste too bitter, and it's going to actually taste more bitter, like burnt sugar, than actual coffee, even if you can't tell it's burnt. But you know, because coffee is just so dark in color that when you actually add the coffee into it, you can't tell that your caramel is burnt, right? However, you'll definitely taste it. So the goal is to get a nice amber color still, just kind of like how you would want how your caramel sauce to look like. And so you can actually see it's nice golden honey color. And I kind of want it to be a little bit darker in color, so I can actually leave it a little bit to get to the color that I'm looking for. And this is where you really kind of manage the color that you're looking for your dry caramel. You actually see that it got deeper in color right here. Looking good. I do like how that golden deep amber color is looking right now. And so to maintain that color without letting it burn, you're basically adding, you know, sugar, just like this sugar right here, to basically regulate the temperature. And do know that when you're going to do this, it's going to get very smoky in the house. So just being very careful, make sure your smoke detectors can handle this. Just being aware of that. And you can see that I'm just going to keep adding sugar in to regulate the temperature. You do a little at a time. As long as you keep coating it, you keep moving it, it should definitely melt and dissolve very evenly. You can see that I'm actually barely putting it directly on the heat unless I want really, really hot heat to control the color or get how to basically make a decision how deep I want the color to be. But I don't want it to be too deep in color. I just want it to continue to just melt the sugar over the heat, and the heat of the pan is what's going to continue to melt the sugar. So you can see that I'm almost done through my 1 cup of sugar here. And it's just turning out really, really beautiful at this point. Beautiful amber color. And just making sure that you have everything prepped before you start the sugar process, because it's going to be a very, very quick process to deglaze the sugar and add in the espresso coffee or your coffee. You do want to blend that in really nicely, and then this is the last of the sugar here. And so I'm just going to let that get to this nice, beautiful amber color. Let it continue to melt. All right, and at this point now the sugar's all melted, I'm turning off the heat. And you want to be very careful of this part. I'm going to add in the espresso. So I'm keeping the sugar over the heat so that it can still maintain, so that it can also not, you know, seize up too quickly. I do want it to continue to be very, hot so that the espresso can mix in really well to the sugar. Just being very careful. The steam gets very hot, so you do want to get a very long spatula or a spoon that just has a really long handle so you just can keep your hands away from the heat. And so at this point, you're just keeping over the heat to make sure the sugar is all dissolved and incorporated really well with the espresso right here. Just kind of let it sit a little bit. And this is, do remember this is equal parts, okay? You have equal parts. You have 1 cup of sugar that you make into a dry caramel, and then you have 1 cup of either coffee or instant espresso, or even, you know, an actual really good quality pulled espresso from an espresso machine. And you can see that this nice deep color comes from the actual coffee and not a burnt caramel. You do not want to burn your caramel when you add in that the coffee, okay? All that color should come from the coffee, not from a burnt sugar, because you'll definitely taste that burnt bitterness from coffee, from that burnt bitterness from the sugar versus the actual coffee. You want to be able to taste the coffee and not taste burnt sugar, okay? All right, and so now that that's all incorporated really well, I'm just gonna actually let it sit in a bowl and just let it cool until it's nice and thickened, because the sugar is gonna naturally thicken it. And then once it cools down at room temperature, you can actually either keep this in the fridge or you can leave it at room temperature, and you can actually start using it and adding it into your chantilly cream or your mousse, or make it into, add a little bit into a simple syrup to make like a coffee syrup, or you can even add it into your buttercream. All right, so that turned out really well, and we'll see how the final results turn out. All right, so the coffee has cooled. I did put it over a water bath, and then I put it into little mason jars right here. It is a little bit more, I don't like it too thick, and so that's why I do equal portions of sugar to the espresso. I mean, 1 cup of espresso and 1 cup of sugar. Part of why I don't like it really too thick is sometimes it's just a little bit harder to you know, pour out, but however, there are times where you might want to do you know, 1 cup of sugar to a 1/2 cup of espresso. You just want to concentrate the espresso even more, being that you're only using a 1/2 cup, but that would give you like a thicker texture to your coffee syrup. But this one had a little bit more time to cool over these two. These are still kind of warm, but you can actually see that it became almost like an extract, right? A concentrated extract. And so I have some buttercream right here. I just kind of wanted to show you like how just a little can go a long way, and you can actually get a lot of coffee flavor into this without actually causing any type of separation into your buttercream. Partly because there's not much liquid into it. Part of it is also because you cooked it down. There's sugar added to it. And do remember, because this is a sugar based concentrate, you do want to account for that sweetness level into your added product, okay? And so this kind of gave it like a nice beige look to it. You know, the color in the camera might not look deep enough, but you could add a little bit more and not be too worried. Because I mean, you can imagine that when you're adding in that coffee, right? It being that it's more like an extract, it's easier to incorporate, right? It's nice and thick like that. But if it was just purely liquid, you know that that's going to end up causing some issues and separation to your buttercream, as well as separation to like a chantilly cream, because you know, chantilly cream, we whip it up really nicely, we get that volume we're looking for, and then it ends up getting, it could easily end up separating, and you could lose that volume if you add any more liquid moisture to it. And so adding just straight coffee into it is not going to give you that deep coffee flavor, but also it's going to cause your chantilly cream to break. Whereas doing a concentrated coffee, really you're adding not too much into it, but you're actually getting a lot of infused flavor, concentrated flavor of the coffee, but also it doesn't change the results of the texture of your buttercream. So my buttercream has been kind of sitting out while I was cooking the sugar, which kind of made it a little bit soft. But I could just throw it in the fridge real quick. It's going to come together really nicely, but nice and stable. Great texture. And it tastes like coffee. So I hope you like this. You do taste that nice, beautiful coffee flavor to it. And you know, it's definitely a much cheaper route than buying all those concentrated coffee flavors online.